I was born in a place most people would pass without a glance. A row of dark houses in an industrial town where the air was thick with smoke and the river ran slow and foul with the waste of factories. My childhood was not filled with laughter, nor with warmth, but with silence and shadows, with the hum of machinery outside and the constant reminder that happiness did not belong in Spinner's End. My father was a muggle, bitter and angry, a man who resented the world and everyone in it, and my mother was a witch, once proud of her magic, but beaten down by the years, her spirit dimmed to embers. Their quarrels filled the house, their voices sharp, and I learned quickly to stay quiet, to slip into corners, to listen but not speak. And if this quiet telling of the wizarding world brings you a little rest, feel free to stay, perhaps even subscribe, but only if it truly brings you peace. Share in the comments where you are listening from and what hour it is there. It feels almost like magic to know that in many corners of the world, others are closing their eyes to the same story, carried together for a moment by the echoes of Harry Potter's world. It was in those corners that I discovered the first flickers of what set me apart. A book left open on the table, a whispered word in the dark, a spark in my hand when my father's anger grew too close. Magic came to me, not as joy but as refuge. I did not smile when I made sparks dance. I hid them, clutching the knowledge like treasure no one could steal. In a house where love was scarce, power became my comfort. The other children in town did not play with me, and I did not seek them, for I felt the difference between us, and I knew they would never understand. But I was not entirely alone. My mother, even in her wariness, would sometimes guide me, teaching me the names of plants, the uses of roots, the quiet art of potion brewing with scraps from her cupboards. Those evenings were rare, but they mattered. I watched her hands stir, measured carefully, and felt that in potions there was control, order, the ability to shape the world with precision when everything else felt chaotic. I carried that lesson always, and it grew into my craft. And still, Spinner's End remained a place of shadows. I grew up among soot and brick, the air heavy, the rooms damp, the river winding like a dark ribbon behind the houses. At night I would slip outside, standing by the banks, watching the water move, listening to the echo of arguments through thin walls. I felt then that the world was larger than this, that I was meant for something beyond the endless smoke and the shouting. Yet I also felt the weight of where I came from, as if it marked me, as if I carried Spinner's End in my very skin. It was by that river that my life changed. I was still a boy, restless and sharp, when I saw a girl playing on the bank. Her hair was red, her laughter bright, her presence so different from the dullness around us that I stopped and stared. She was Lily Evans, and she was not like the others. She made flowers bloom at her touch, leapt from branch to branch with grace, and her eyes held wonder where others held only boredom. I knew at once she was like me, that she had magic, that she carried the same strangeness I did, but in her it shone, in me it burned. I remember the first time I spoke to her. My voice was awkward, my words too sharp, but she listened, curious, and when I showed her that she was not alone, when I explained that the things she could do were signs of what she was, she smiled in a way that lit something in me I had never felt. For the first time in my life, I was not only a boy hiding in shadows, I was someone who knew, someone who could share. With Lily, I felt seen. Those days by the river became my refuge. I told her of the world she belonged to, of Hogwarts, of wands and spells and houses. I spoke with pride, even as I carried doubt, for in teaching her I taught myself, and in her laughter I found light. My own home remained a place of anger, my father unchanged, my mother fading, but with Lily I could breathe. I clung to that friendship fiercely, as though it were the only thing keeping me alive, and perhaps it was. Yet even then, there were shadows in me. I was possessive, jealous, fearful of losing her, for she was the only brightness I had. I saw the way her sister Petunia looked at us, with suspicion and bitterness, and I knew that the world would try to pull Lily away. I swore silently that I would never let that happen, that I would stand between her and all who would deny her magic. But love mixed with fear becomes something darker, and though I did not see it then, I was already setting the course of my life. In Spinner's End, nights were long. I would lie awake, hearing the shouts of my father, the weary replies of my mother, the hum of the river. I dreamed of Hogwarts, of a castle far from smoke and shadow, of a place where magic was not secret but celebrated. I longed for escape, for belonging, for power enough to never feel small again. Lily was part of that dream, perhaps the brightest part, yet my hunger for more grew alongside my love for her. Looking back, I can see how it began. A boy in a broken house, clutching secrets, finding light in one friendship, and already shaping the self that would one day be both feared and hated. I was Severus Snape, the half-blood prince, though I did not yet know the name. I was simply a boy in Spinner's End, waiting for the world to begin. I returned to the river each afternoon because the water carried a sound that softened the noise inside my head. The mills groaned, the chimneys breathed, the streets pressed in, but the river moved with its own quiet purpose, and beside it, Lily seemed to belong to a different world. She would skip stones in a way that made the ripples look like circles of light, and she would hold a leaf in her palm and make it curl or unfurl, and when she laughed, I felt the air change. I told myself I came to teach her, to prepare her for the place I dreamed about each night, yet I knew I came because her presence kept me from slipping back into the dark corners of Spinner's End. I was careful with my voice at first, careful with every word, because I had learned that one wrong sound could start a fight at home. But she did not snap, she listened, and the more she listened, the more I spoke. I explained Hogwarts the way a starving boy would describe a banquet. I described a ceiling like the night sky carried indoors, candles that floated, long tables heavy with food, professors who knew secrets older than the town itself. I told her about the four houses, the founders, the sorting hat that read the mind and spoke the truth. I spoke of moving staircases and hidden passages and a lake like a mirror. I did not say how much I needed to escape. I did not say how my father's stare made me swallow words that burned my throat. I did not say that every night I counted days until a letter would arrive. I held all that back and spoke of wonder instead, because wonder was the only thing that made sense when Lily smiled. She was quick to learn. When I showed her a trick with a twig and a whisper of intent, she tried. And when nothing came, she tried again. And when the leaf trembled, she clapped once, a little gasp of triumph, and I felt pride rise in me like warmth. No one had ever looked at me with gratitude, not like that. I had studied alone, hoarding scraps of knowledge, repeating syllables in the dark, until they felt like a charm against every insult I had heard. Now I could give what I had kept. Now I could be more than a silent boy. I became her guide, her translator between the dull town and the world waiting beyond the mills. Each small success bound us closer. Each laugh threaded through the afternoon like a spell that did not need a wand. We walked the lanes when the light slanted low, and we spoke about her sister. And I did not hide my disdain, though I tried to keep it gentle for Lily's sake. Petunia watched us with tight lips, her eyes fixed on the places where our hands moved, on the times we did not speak, as though silence itself were a crime. Petunia wanted the world to be small, and I knew too much about small worlds. I could feel the gravity of ordinary life pulling at Lily, and I hated it, not because she loved her sister, but because I felt that same pull in my own house, and I feared it would drag her away from me. I told her that magic was not a fault, that there was no shame in being different, that difference meant possibility. She nodded, but the nod carried the weight of choosing sides, and I felt guilty even as I was relieved. There were days when the river smelled of iron and decay, and the sky hung low, and Lily asked about wands, about shops, about the way a person was matched to the wood they would carry for life. I told her that the wand would choose her, and she laughed, not mocking but surprised, and asked how a piece of wood could choose anything. I said that magic was older than wood or wand maker, that it knew what hands were honest, what hearts would tremble and still act. She said that sounded like a story, and I said that all true magic sounded like a story at first. She smiled and said, "Then we will make our own story." And the words struck me because I did not know that anyone would ever say "we" with me in it. When we were alone, I would practice small things, coaxing a flame to bend, urging a thread of water into shapes above the river. Nothing large, nothing that would draw eyes from windows. She watched and asked questions about focus and breath, and why anger sometimes made the effect stronger and sometimes crushed it. Few ever asked me anything with such attention. Her curiosity was not a test, it was trust. So I warned her that magic born of anger would burn the hand that cast it, that rage was a knife without a handle. She took that in with a solemn look and then tossed a pebble into the water and asked me to show her the gentler way. I tried. For her, I always tried. In my house at night, I wrote notes on torn paper, lists of things I wanted to share with her, names of potions, plants to look for in the hedges outside town, little tricks that would not startle anyone if they were seen by accident. My mother saw one scrap near the sink and pressed it into my hand without a word, as if she understood that these notes were the first careful map I had ever been able to draw. Once she even smiled, faint and tired, when I told her Lily could make petals dance on her palm. My father said nothing, but his silence sharpened, and I learned to fold joy into the shape of caution. It did not matter. The river waited. Lily waited. I could endure anything for the sake of those afternoons. The day the letter came for me, I ran to the river with it, breathless, the seal warm against my fingers. Lily was there already, as if she had felt it, and when I showed her, she laughed and demanded to read every word, and I let her, though I knew the letter was mine, because nothing felt truly mine until I had shared it with her. She said she was waiting for hers. She said she would not sleep until the owl came, and I said the owl would not dare delay. The envy I might have felt, if anyone else had spoken so, was absent. With Lily, I did not fear being overshadowed. I wanted her to blaze. I wanted to stand near the light and learn how to reflect it without stealing it. Her letter arrived, and she met me with triumph in her eyes, and we planned the visit to Diagon Alley as if we were planning a heist against the dullness of our town. We imagined the taste of sweets we had never eaten, the smell of books we had never held, the feel of a wand that would belong to us. That week passed like a dream that finally remembered to become real. When we stood at last in the daylight of the alley, the noise and color and sense crashed over us, and for a moment I could not speak. Lily took my hand without thinking, the way a person steadies themselves on a boat, and I felt a steadiness spread through me in return. We stared at cauldrons stacked like dark moons, at robes that whispered across their rails, at an owl that blinked with a gravity equal to any professor. We laughed over nothing because everything felt like something. Ollivander's was a room that listened. Dust hung like slow snow, and boxes rose in towers, and the air held a thrum that set every hair on my arm on end. The old man moved with a curiosity that made me aware of my posture, my breath, the way my name sounded when he said it. When he placed a wand in my hand the first time, the wood felt cold, then heavy, then wrong, and the spark that jumped from the tip sputtered like a wet match. He nodded, untroubled, and tried again and again, until the wand that belonged to me settled across my palm with a feeling like a lock turning. The light that swelled felt like a held breath at last released. When Lily's wand found her, the room seemed to recognize her with a warmth that made my chest ache. I watched her face as the magic answered, and I told myself there was no danger in loving what I saw. In flourish and blots, we stood far longer than we had coins for. I ran my finger down the spines of books that smelled of ink and old leather, and I marked every title in my mind. Potions drew me like a tide, but I watched Lily hover near charms and transfiguration. Not because she avoided the darker corners, but because she loved the elegance of clean change. She would make a matchstick become a needle, and then a matchstick again. Not to prove anything, only to feel the grace of it. I felt a heat under my skin when I imagined making things obey me, bending rules until they broke. But in that moment, I wanted to share her grace more than I wanted power. We chose robes, and I watched the mirror swallow the boy from Spinner's End and return a version of me who might belong somewhere clean. Lily turned in a slow circle, the black fabric drawing out the deep green in her eyes, and she said that for the first time she believed all my stories. I said they had always been true, and she laughed and said of course, she had only needed to touch the truth to accept it. It seemed then that the world was opening like a book to the first bright page. On the train to Hogwarts, we found a compartment and sat by the window, faces pressed to the glass like children who had never seen fields before, which in truth we had, but never like this. The smoke curled, the whistle cried, and the town slid away. She asked me which house I would want, and I said Slytherin, with a certainty that hid uncertainty beneath. I wanted greatness, and Slytherin promised it, and I told myself that ambition was simply the name for refusing to remain small. She said she did not care, as long as we would be friends. The words should have anchored me. They did for one blessed moment. Then the door opened, and two boys stood there with easy confidence and careless smiles, and the first spoke like a person certain that every room he entered would become his. He made a joke at my hair, at my clothes, and Lily frowned, but I felt shame flare hot, and I sharpened my tongue because I had no other weapon. We traded words that seemed clever to a boy and foolish to a man, and the door slid shut with a sound that would echo in me for years. Lily took my hand and said, "Ignore them," and I nodded, but I did not forget. I tucked the moment away like a blade. The river and its quiet grace felt far for a breath. And then Lily squeezed my fingers, and the carriage filled again with the soft rhythm of wheels, and the promise that distance would become safety. I told her again about the sorting hat, about how it listened and how it cared, and she asked if it would listen to fear, and I said yes, but it would hear the part that was braver than fear. She looked at me as if she believed that I could be that part, and I felt a steadiness return. We reached the station at last, the lanterns bright, the night cool, the air new. Boats rocked on black water, and the first sight of the castle rose above us like a story that had grown stone. Lily leaned forward, breath held, eyes wide, and I thought that if I had done nothing else in my life, bringing her to this moment would have been enough. We did not speak as the boats moved. We did not need to. The oars drew their gentle circles, the lake reflected towers, and I felt the last threads of Spinner's End loosen around my throat. I told myself that whatever came, I would keep this, the river and this lake, and the girl who had turned my world from shadow to color. I told myself I would never betray this light. I did not yet understand how fear could twist a vow into a chain. The doors opened, the hall shone, the ceiling spread stars, and I felt small in a way that was not shame. The sorting would come, and choices would follow, and I clutched my wand and thought of the river that had taught me to watch the surface and the current beneath. Lily caught my eye and smiled, and in that breath, everything seemed possible. I did not know then how fragile possibility can be in the hands of a frightened boy. I knew only that I had walked from smoke into candlelight, and that the girl with red hair stood close enough for me to believe in the future. Candles floated in the air, their flames steady though no breeze touched them, and the ceiling mirrored the stars outside so perfectly that I forgot I stood beneath stone. We shuffled in a line, the first years, our names called one by one. My heart beat sharp, and I clenched my wand in my sleeve, though it had no power yet. I searched for Lily in the crowd, and when I found her, she smiled, the kind of smile that calmed and burned at once. I told myself that wherever I went, we would not be parted, though even then a whisper of doubt stirred in me. The sorting hat waited, a ragged thing on a stool, its mouth opening like something alive. One by one the children sat, the hat lowered, the voice unheard by others murmuring in their minds. They left the stool changed, their faces lit with pride or shadowed with uncertainty as they joined tables that welcomed or judged. Gryffindor roared, Hufflepuff clapped, Ravenclaw hummed with polite approval. Slytherin watched in silence, their eyes sharp and measuring. I felt them glance at me already, the boy from Spinner's End, the boy who carried secrets. When my name was called, I stepped forward, my shoes clicking on the stone louder than they should. I sat, the hat dropped, and the voice entered my head, sly and knowing. "Ah," it said, "ambitious, clever, hungry for recognition. Yes, I see much in you, and a darkness too, a willingness to seize what others will not. You would do well in Slytherin, where greatness awaits." But the hat paused. "And yet there is loyalty, fierce and dangerous, a love that clings even when it burns. You could be Gryffindor, you know, courage enough, though anger would twist it." I thought of Lily. I thought of her eyes watching me. I whispered, not aloud but within, "Slytherin. I must be Slytherin." I told myself it was for ambition, for power, for belonging. But beneath it all I knew it was because I feared losing her. If I could stand proud in Slytherin, perhaps she would not drift to others who laughed so easily. The hat chuckled. "You have chosen," it said, and with a cry, it declared my house. The table in green and silver clapped, though without warmth. I walked to them, sat, and felt the weight of the dungeon beneath me already. I glanced back at Lily. When her turn came, the hat barely touched her head before it shouted Gryffindor. She joined the roaring crowd, her hair catching the light like fire. She smiled at me across the hall, but the space between our tables stretched farther than the river at Spinner's End. Already we were divided, though we did not know it. Life in Slytherin began with whispers. My blood was half, my clothes worn, my accent marked. They measured me and found me lacking. But I answered with sharp words, with brilliance in class, with spells whispered faster than they could follow. Potions was my realm, the simmer of cauldrons, the scent of herbs, the promise of transformation. Professor Slughorn praised me, his eyes lighting, when I brewed what others spoiled. Recognition came at last, though it was never enough. I wanted more. At night in the dormitory, the stones cold, I lay awake and listened to the breathing of others who would never be friends. My thoughts ran to Lily in Gryffindor Tower, laughing with girls who did not know me, perhaps sitting near the boy with messy hair, who had mocked me on the train. I clenched my fists and swore I would prove myself, not to them, but to her, though even then, pride and bitterness mixed in me like incompatible potions, bubbling toward explosion. The years stretched, classes filled with incantations and theory. I learned faster than most, my notes crammed with observations, my experiments pushing beyond the pages. Others copied me, but I guarded my secrets, writing in the margins of books, twisting spells into new shapes. They called me strange, dangerous, but I told myself it was genius. If I could master what they feared, I would never again be the boy mocked, the boy ignored. But every triumph tasted hollow when I saw Lily smile at others. I walked the halls alone, robes trailing, my eyes sharp, and told myself that power would keep her close. I did not see that power also pushed her away. And sharpened glances. The dormitories lay deep in the dungeons, lit by green lanterns that reflected on the water outside the narrow windows. The walls sweated dampness. The air smelled of stone and shadow, and the beds creaked when boys shifted in their sleep. I lay awake most nights listening to their breathing, knowing they did not see me as one of them. My father's muggle blood stained me in their eyes, and though they rarely said it aloud, I felt the weight of their disdain. I answered not with fists but with study. In the pages of books I found certainty. In the fumes of potions I found control. When Slughorn praised me, when he showed my work to others, when he held me up as an example, I felt the sting of rejection ease for a moment. I threw myself into potions, because potions did not laugh, did not mock. They answered to precision, to patience, to the smallest change of heat or stir. A pinch too much, and the cauldron spat failure. A pinch too little, and the mixture lay dormant. But in my hands they obeyed. I discovered shortcuts, invented twists, made notes in cramped handwriting that lined every margin. I kept a book that became my refuge, where every observation became a step toward mastery. while others wasted time on chatter. I studied because I knew that brilliance was the only weapon I had. Still, brilliance did not protect me from the Marauders. James Potter and Sirius Black were shadows I could never escape. They were Gryffindors, golden in the eyes of teachers, quick with wands, quicker with laughter. Their pranks won applause. Their cruelty was disguised as charm. They mocked my hair, my clothes, my accent, the way I walked. They dragged me into humiliations in front of crowds, dangling me upside down, exposing me like prey. The hall roared with laughter while I burned with rage. Even Lily scolded them, her eyes furious, but the shame clung to me all the same. I told myself that every insult would one day be answered. I told myself that they thrived now because the world was foolish, because Hogwarts adored bravado and despised quiet talent. But the world would change. Power would reveal the truth, and when it did, James Potter and Sirius Black would see who I had become. That vow grew in me like a second heart, beating alongside my longing for Lily. Our friendship endured through those years, though cracks spread. She defended me when she could, but her voice could not silence the whispers about my friends in Slytherin, about the spells I collected, about the bitterness in my tone. I felt her slipping from me and clutched tighter, too tight, until she pulled back. When I looked at her across the hall, sitting among Gryffindors who admired her, I felt both pride and fear. Pride because I had known her before any of them. Fear because I could feel her light dimming in my grasp. In secret, I practiced spells most others avoided. Dark magic was not forbidden in Slytherin. It was whispered, traded, explored, like dangerous fire. I told myself I sought knowledge only, that I was not like those who sought cruelty. Yet when I muttered incantations and saw the power they unleashed, I felt a thrill that no potion could match. Knowledge was control. Control meant safety. And safety meant I would never be the boy humiliated again. But Lily hated it. When she saw the books I carried, when she heard the names of the curses I studied, her eyes filled with disappointment. She said I was changing, and I said I was only becoming stronger. She said strength did not need cruelty, and I said she did not understand. I wanted her approval, but I wanted power more, and in choosing one I began to lose the other. By my 4th year, the distance was clear. I sat in dungeons with those who admired the same shadows I did, those who spoke of a wizarding world ruled by the strong, and I told myself they were friends. Yet when I looked at Lily laughing with her Gryffindor companions, I felt the hollow widen. I still walked with her sometimes by the lake, still spoke of old days by the river, but already the air between us was filled with what we could not say. She begged me to turn away from certain students. I refused, and the silence between us lengthened. I was a young Slytherin, brilliant, bitter, ambitious, and already half lost. I carried Spinner's End in my bones. I carried Lily in my heart. I carried the Marauders in my rage, and I carried the taste of power on my tongue. Every step I took was a step deeper into shadows, and though I told myself I could turn back at any time, the truth is that I did not want to. For the first time in my life, I felt that greatness was within reach, and I believed that greatness was all I needed. It grew like a thorn bush, each small cut adding to the wound until the pain became permanent. From the first train ride, James Potter and Sirius Black had marked me as target, their careless confidence set against my quiet bitterness, their easy laughter against my guarded silence. They thrived on the attention of others, their arrogance fed by cheers, and I stood in contrast, a boy from a poor house, a boy from Spinner's End. I despised them before they truly began to despise me, because I saw in them everything I lacked, and because Lily seemed drawn to their brightness even when she scolded their cruelty. In classes, we crossed paths constantly. James flicked hexes behind my back. Sirius turned my work into spectacle, and when I retaliated, it was always I who was punished. Teachers saw charm in them and malice in me, though the truth was more tangled. They were brilliant in their own ways, reckless but skilled, their spells precise, their teamwork seamless. They hunted me as a pack hunts, circling, laughing, driving me into corners. I hated them with a depth that surprised even myself, because each humiliation reopened every wound I carried from home. Every night of my father's insults, every glance of disdain from Slytherins who saw me as half-blood. They turned the halls into arenas, and every day I sharpened my mind into a weapon to endure. One day by the lake became a memory that etched itself into me. They had caught me unprepared, James with his wand, Sirius egging him on, Lupin standing back silent, Pettigrew squeaking with nervous laughter. With a flick, James had me dangling upside down, my robes falling, my shame exposed to a crowd of students who jeered and pointed. I struggled, but my wand clattered uselessly away. My hair hung in my face, my anger burned, and I swore then that one day they would bow before me. Lily arrived, her voice sharp, her anger cutting through the noise, and she defended me. But even her defense cut deeper than the humiliation, because she turned to me and demanded why I let them provoke me, why I fed their cruelty with my rage. Her words stung worse than their laughter, because I wanted her admiration, not her pity. It was during those years that I began to retreat further into Slytherin's circle, to the company of those who whispered of power, of pure blood, of a future where the strong would rise. They welcomed me, not because they liked me, but because I had knowledge, skill, ambition. With them, I was not the victim. I was the one others watched with caution. It was easy to slip into their company when the alternative was scorn. But Lily saw it, and she recoiled. She begged me not to trust them, not to lose myself, but I felt I had no choice. Better to walk in shadow than to be dragged into light only to be mocked. The rivalry with James and Sirius deepened into something poisonous. They despised me as much as I despised them. They called me snivelous. They turned my name into mockery. I sharpened my insults in return, but mine were bitter, theirs were easy. They seemed to win with every word. I threw myself into my studies, into spells they would not dare learn, into potions they could not master, because knowledge was my victory. If I could not defeat them in laughter, I would defeat them in power. There were nights when I walked the castle alone, through dungeons and empty corridors, muttering incantations under my breath, carving them into my mind. Each spell became a shield against their mockery. Each page of notes a step toward a future where I would never again be helpless. Yet, even in my solitude, I thought of Lily, and I knew she was slipping further into their orbit. James's arrogance seemed to amuse her at times, though she denied it, and I could not bear the thought. My jealousy became fuel for my anger, and my anger drove me deeper into paths that she could not follow. The Marauders were not merely schoolboy enemies. They were reminders. They reminded me of every failure, every humiliation, every shadow I could not escape. They forced me to face what I was and what I was not. I hated them for that. I hated their laughter, their brightness, their ease with the world. And yet I knew that part of my hatred was envy, because they lived without fear, while I carried fear in every step. By the time our 5th year ended, the rivalry was carved into stone. There was no reconciliation, no hope of truce. We were bound to one another through contempt. Each act of cruelty answered with bitterness, each defense with sharper words. They would remember me as the boy they mocked. I would remember them as the boys who taught me to build walls of iron around my heart. And Lily would remember us all as children, tearing each other apart, though she would never forgive me for the path I chose. I was young, but already the course of my life had bent toward shadows. The Marauders had helped push me there, though it was I who walked willingly. They were rivals, yes, but more than that, they were the mirror against which I measured myself, and I swore I would never again be found wanting. Afternoon by the lake where students drifted in small groups, laughter in the air, the water shining with a calm that mocked the storm inside me. I had escaped the dungeon to breathe, to watch the ripples, to imagine a world where my name did not draw snickers, and where my robes were not a banner that invited contempt. I carried my books like armor. my wand hidden in my sleeve, my pride a thin shield I clung to because nothing else stood between me and the memory of every humiliation. I saw Lily before I heard the voices. She stood with friends under the shade of a tree, her hair catching the light, her face turned toward the water, and for a moment the ache in me softened. Then the voices sharpened, familiar and cruel. James and Sirius with their easy arrogance, Remus standing back as if distance could absolve him, Pettigrew chuckling with a sound that made my teeth clench. I told myself to walk away, to hold silence like a spell, to keep my temper sealed, but they scented weakness the way wolves scent blood. A hex tugged at my ankle and I stumbled. Another flick and I was on my back. Books spilled, quills scattered, the sky spinning above. James leaned over me with that smile that pretended kindness while it enjoyed the cut. "Stand up, Snivelus," he said without saying, and the crowd around us gathered the way crows gather when a meal is certain. I tried to rise and a jinx twisted my legs. I tried to reach my wand and a charm lifted me into the air, robes falling, shame exposed. The laughter hit me harder than any spell, louder than any curse, and under the sound, I felt the familiar heat that always turned thought into fire. I saw Lily moving toward us, her face set, her voice cutting across the crowd with a clarity that always made me listen. She told them to stop. She told them to grow up. She told them what I could not say without breaking. James grinned and offered to release me, to be generous, if only I would admit I was grateful. The offer was poison wrapped in silk. I felt every bruise of every year in that breath, every night in Spinner's End when I swore I would never beg, every glance at the Slytherin table that said I did not belong anywhere. I looked at Lily, the one person who had seen me before Hogwarts and before anger, and something in me reeled between gratitude and shame. They lowered me, and I crashed to the grass. My knees struck, my palms burned, my wand slid away, and the crowd shifted like a sea. Lily reached down to help me, the same hand that had held leaves by the river and laughed when they curled to her will. I saw pity in the eyes of some who watched. I saw relish in others. I saw relief in those who were glad it was not their turn. The word rose in me like bile. It tasted like every wall I had ever leaned against to keep from falling. It tasted like my father's contempt, like whispers in the dormitory when I walked past, like the secret snickers when Slughorn praised a potion and someone hissed that a half-blood should not excel. It tasted like fear that Lily would walk back to the Gryffindor crowd and never look at me again. The word came to my lips before thought could cage it. Mudblood. Silence took the air and folded it. I heard my own breathing and the distant lap of water and the soft change in Lily's face. The pride that had held me rigid collapsed at once, leaving a cold that started in the gut and spread outward. I had said the one thing I had sworn I would never say. I had used the language of those who wore their blood as armor and wielded it as a blade against anyone who did not share it. I had taken the vocabulary of contempt and pressed it into the hand of the only person who had offered me grace. The crowd murmured, hungry for the next cut, but Lily did not cut. She stepped back. She said nothing for a long heartbeat, and in that heartbeat I understood that some words are spells that cannot be countered. I stammered an apology that failed before it began. The sound fell flat, because apology offered under the gaze of a crowd is not an apology, it is performance, and Lily would not let me pretend. Her eyes were not hard. They were wounded, and the wound was mine. She told me quietly that she had defended me again and again, that she had believed there was good in me I would choose, that she could not follow me into a circle that used that word like a key. She turned away and walked to the friends who stood waiting, not triumphant, only sad, and I remained kneeling on the grass while the laughter returned. Thinner now, uncertain, as if even those who mocked me had sensed that a line had been crossed that would not be uncrossed. I rose, gathered my books with hands that shook, found my wand, and walked without seeing the path. The corridor swallowed me, the dungeon cooled my face, the mirror in the lavatory returned an image I despised. I told myself I had been pushed, that James had forced my hand, that Sirius had planned the humiliation, that the word had slipped loose in a moment of pain. Each sentence tried to shrink the truth. The truth was that I had chosen the word because it gave me power for one heartbeat, because it let me strike at the one person whose opinion could still save me from who I was becoming. Power borrowed from contempt returns as emptiness. The emptiness arrived and sat with me until the candle's gutters. I found her later in a corridor where light pooled in quiet. I spoke without anger, without armor. I said the word again, only to deny it, to repudiate it, to crush it under my heel. I told her that I had been a fool, that I had been cornered, that I had let the voices of others fill my mouth. I told her I would throw away the books that frightened her, that I would step back from the friends who did not deserve the name, that I would change if only she would not let go. She listened with a patience I did not deserve, and then she told me that change must come before forgiveness, not after it, that apology cannot be a key to reopen a door if the hinges remain rusted with the same poison. She said she loved the boy by the river, who had told her she was not alone, and she feared the young man in the dungeon who had learned to enjoy the taste of power too much. She said she could not walk beside both. I slept little in the weeks that followed, and when I did sleep, I dreamed of the river and woke to the dungeon. In class, I excelled more fiercely, because mastery numbed feeling and I sought numbness the way others sought sleep. My Slytherin companions told me I had spoken truth by the lake, that I had shown courage, that Lily would either understand or become irrelevant. Their praise sounded like the echo inside an empty cauldron. I convinced myself that if Lily would not stand with me, I would find allies who would. I let my pride steer me past regret toward the nearest harbor, even as I knew the tide there was black. I began to spend evenings with students who passed names in whispers, who spoke of a wizard whose vision promised order, purity, strength, a world where the worthy would not be mocked by boys with easy smiles and old money. They spoke of service and destiny, of marks worn with pride, and I listened because their words soothed the wound of humiliation. I told myself I would take their power and keep my conscience, that I could stand near darkness and not be dark, that I could walk through fire and not carry smoke. It is easy to speak this way when the first warmth of belonging kisses skin that has known only cold. I saw Lily in corridors and did not approach or approached and found my tongue clumsy. She spoke kindly when we had to speak, her gaze level, her distance clear. I watched James grow into his swagger, Sirius into his charm, Remus into his careful neutrality, Pettigrew into a shadow. I fed my anger with their faces and starved my remorse with the same food. At night, I practiced spells that curled like thorns. I invented cuts that bled without blood. I wrote in my margins under a name that felt like armor against shame, the Half-Blood Prince, a crown made from what others used as insult, a name that let me hide the boy who had knelt in the grass while the girl he loved stepped away. The word that broke us did more than end a friendship. It diverted a river that might have carried me toward light. I watched from the bank I had chosen as the water moved away, and I told myself that I preferred the shadows under the trees. Pride makes a poor lantern. It burns fast and leaves you in deeper dark. Yet I kept walking, because to turn back required a kind of courage I could not find in myself. I told myself there would be other chances, that the future would offer a way to mend what I had torn, that success would make forgiveness easier. This is how a heart bargains with a debt it cannot pay. In the quiet of the library, one evening I reached for a book whose spine was cracked with years, and a page fell free and drifted to my lap. A line there spoke of power that bends the will of others, of a path that begins with words and ends with vows. I ran my finger under the ink and felt the tug of a future I pretended to resist. I thought of Lily and of how language had failed me, and I told myself that if words could betray, then perhaps silence would be my ally. But silence without truth hardens into secrecy, and secrecy breeds the kind of choices that cannot be confessed until it is too late. I walked from that day into a life shaped by a sound I could not unsay. The Marauders remained my enemies. Lily remained the absence at the center of every room. Slytherin remained the home that never warmed me, and I remained a boy who mistook contempt for strength. The lake glittered under moonlight, careless of the pain it had witnessed, and the castle slept. I lay awake and rehearsed the moment until the memory wore thin, yet it never broke. Some spells linger even after the wand is lowered. Some wounds seal without healing. The word that broke us became the hinge on which my fate would turn, and I stepped through the door it opened because I had no courage left to close it. Terrible, so I filled it with study. The dungeons grew colder, the nights stretched longer, and I turned pages as if each one might carry the answer to the hollow I carried inside. Potions still gave me control, but it was in the shadows of spellcraft that I began to search for something more. There were tomes hidden behind locked doors, scrolls whispered about but rarely seen, incantations that promised mastery beyond the timid teachings of the classroom. I told myself it was curiosity, but in truth, it was hunger. Knowledge meant strength, and strength meant that no one, not James Potter, not Sirius Black, not any of them could ever mock me again. Dark magic came to me in fragments. A hex here, a curse there, traded in whispers among those who called themselves my allies. They were not friends, not in any true sense, but they were companions in ambition. They spoke of a rising power, of a wizard whose voice promised purity and order, who offered a place for those willing to seize it. I listened more than I spoke, but every word sank deep. They said the world was divided between the worthy and the unworthy, and that magic was not meant to be shackled by pity. I did not believe all of it, not then, but I wanted to believe enough to quiet the ache in me. In my notebook, the one I guarded like a part of my own body, I scratched out spells that twisted in new directions. I experimented with the shapes of curses, testing how they bent, how they could wound without leaving marks, how they could restrain without binding. I marked successes with satisfaction and failures with anger, and over time the book became more of myself than my own reflection in the mirror. To others it was just ink on paper, but to me it was proof that I could forge my own path, even if it was cut through shadows. The teachers noticed only fragments. Slughorn praised my brilliance, said I had the makings of a master, invited me into his little gatherings, where he surrounded himself with talent he thought might rise to power one day. He called it the Slug Club, and though I loathed the shallow pretense of it, I went. Recognition, even false recognition, mattered when the rest of the school saw only Snivelus. But beneath his smile and his gifts of candied pineapple, I felt the hollowness. He did not see me, not really, only the potential he might later boast about. Still, I took what I could. My experiments grew bolder. In the corners of the library where the dust was thickest, I traced spells that curled like smoke around the mind. One of them, Sectum Sempra, I created myself, a curse meant to slice as if with invisible blades. I told myself it was a weapon for defense, but in my heart I knew it was for vengeance. Each stroke of ink across the page was an answer to James's laughter, to Sirius's smirk, to every humiliation I carried like a scar. I crafted other spells as well, some cruel, some subtle, each one proof that I could shape magic as I pleased. The lure of the dark arts was not only in the spells, but in the way they made me feel. Power hummed at my fingertips when I whispered words others dared not speak. It filled the silence where Lily's voice used to be. It steadied me when the halls echoed with jeers. It told me I could be more than what my father had been, more than what Slytherin whispered behind my back. It told me I could be someone who commanded respect rather than begged for it. But power isolates. The more I learned, the further I walked from her. I saw her with James more often, his hand brushing hers, her laughter spilling like it once did with me. Every smile she gave him was a knife, and every knife drove me deeper into the arms of shadows. I told myself that if I grew strong enough, if I proved myself, she would see. But in truth, each step toward darkness was a step away from her. At night, I dreamt of Spinner's End, of the river where we had first spoken, of her hair in the sunlight. And when I woke, I wrote curses in my margins to banish the ache. That was the pattern of those years, regret and anger, longing and pride, woven together until I could no longer tell them apart. I was becoming something different, someone who no longer belonged to the boy by the river, nor yet to the man I would one day be. The lure of the dark arts is not a sudden fall. It is a slow yielding, a surrender piece by piece. A word spoken here, a hex muttered there, a secret kept too tightly. You do not notice the darkness growing until you look back and realize the light is far behind. I told myself I was only exploring, that I was only preparing for a world that would not be kind. But the truth is that the darkness had already taken root in me, and I fed it because it felt like strength. And so I walked deeper into it, notebook in hand, bitterness in my heart, power whispering promises in the silence where once there had been laughter. And the voices became invitations. It was not sudden. It was not a dramatic oath sworn in fire. It was a steady drift, a current I let carry me because turning against it would have meant facing how far I had already gone. In Slytherin common room, boys spoke of power as if it were a prize waiting just beyond the castle walls. They told stories of the Dark Lord, of how he had been one of us, of how he had risen with brilliance no one could match, of how he was gathering those wise enough to follow him. They spoke with pride, with envy, with hunger, and I listened in silence while my heart beat faster. To hear them talk was to hear the echo of my own desire. At first I told myself I only observed. I had always been on the outside, always watching more than speaking, and now I watched the shape of a new world forming in shadows. They said blood mattered. They said heritage was the measure of worth. They said muggles were filth that diluted power. I did not agree with every word, for I was half-blood and could never forget it. But when I thought of my father and his fists, of Spinner's End and its smoke, of the way James and Sirius laughed at me, I felt the temptation of believing, to belong to something greater than myself, to stand among those who feared nothing, to finally command respect instead of begging for scraps. That temptation was stronger than doubt. I began to slip into gatherings outside school, hidden corners where older boys introduced me to men who bore the mark already. They spoke with quiet certainty, their eyes gleaming with conviction. They said the Dark Lord promised a world where we would not hide, where wizards would rule as they were meant to, where power would not be wasted on the weak. Their words filled the emptiness that had grown since Lily left me. Love had once been my anchor, now ambition replaced it. I thought if I could not have one, I would take the other. The first time I saw the mark burned into flesh, I felt a shiver that was both fear and desire. The snake and skull writhed as if alive, black against pale skin, a symbol of belonging. I imagined it on my own arm, a mark that would silence laughter, a mark that would declare me untouchable. I told myself it was destiny, that the world had pushed me here, that James Potter had shoved me into shadows until shadows became my home. I told myself that Lily's distance had left me no other path. But the truth is simpler. I wanted power. I wanted to feel that I mattered, even if the price was steep. When the day came that I swore allegiance, there were no trumpets, no triumph, only a room thick with smoke and voices murmuring words of loyalty. The Dark Lord himself did not speak to me that day, but his presence lingered in every vow. My name was spoken, my blood acknowledged, and I was told I would serve. The mark was not yet mine, but I knew it would be. I left that place with a thrill under my skin, the knowledge that I had crossed a line I would never uncross. I returned to Hogwarts with eyes that saw differently. Lessons felt shallow, the warnings of professors weak. I had glimpsed a world where power was not moderated by rules, where ambition was not called arrogance but strength. I brewed potions with sharper intent. I wrote in my notebook with bolder strokes, and when I passed Lily in the halls, I felt the distance as final. She looked at me with sorrow, perhaps even pity, but no longer with the warmth that once lit the riverbank. I avoided her gaze, not because I did not want it, but because I could not bear what it revealed. The Death Eater's call was not only in meetings or whispers, it was in the way I began to think. I saw Muggles as weakness because I hated my father. I saw half-bloods as shame because I hated myself. I saw Gryffindors as enemies because I hated James. Hatred became the language through which I justified every step. Each new curse I learned, each charm twisted into something darker, felt like a reply to every insult I had endured. Power made me believe I was winning, even as I was losing myself. I remember the night I first watched a spell of true cruelty. It was cast casually, as if it were nothing, a flick of a wand and a man crumpled, screaming, begging for mercy. I did not cast it, not then, but I did not turn away. I told myself that knowledge required observation, that strength required understanding. Yet even as I stood still, something in me recoiled, a voice that whispered of the boy by the river who had once told a girl she was not alone. That voice grew quieter each day until it was almost gone. The Death Eater's call is not a shout, it is a whisper that fills silence until you cannot hear anything else. It promises you will never again be mocked, never again be small, never again be forgotten. I followed it because I believed those promises, because I was too afraid to remain powerless. But every promise carried chains, and though I did not know it yet, the chains would one day drag me to my knees before Dumbledore, before Lily's son, before my own reflection. And for me, one of those moments came in a dimly lit room above the Hog's Head. I had been drifting deeper into the Dark Lord's service, though still finishing my time at Hogwarts, still holding the appearance of a student who excelled in his chosen field. But by then, I moved easily between two worlds, the world of learning and the world of shadows, carrying messages, listening where others spoke too loudly, gathering pieces of information the Dark Lord craved. I told myself it was duty, that I was proving my worth, but the truth is that I hungered for recognition, for any sign that my power meant something. It was in this state that I found myself pressed against a door, listening to the voice of a woman who spoke with feverish intensity, Sybil Trelawney. Her words came not as her own, but as if some current had seized her and forced prophecy from her lips. I had been instructed to listen, to bring back anything of value, and what I heard that night bound me to a destiny I never intended to carry. She spoke of a child, born as the 7th month dies, a child with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord, a child marked as his equal. She said that the Dark Lord would mark him as his equal, but he would have power the Dark Lord knew not. Her voice broke the silence like a spell tearing open a sky. I carried those words quickly, too quickly, eager to prove myself. I returned to the Dark Lord with what I thought was triumph, certain that I had delivered a gift worthy of his trust. He listened with a quiet that unsettled me, his red eyes fixed, his mind already calculating. I did not know then that I had signed the death of the only person I had ever truly loved. I thought only of the weight of recognition, of the nod that told me I had been useful, but soon I understood the cost. The prophecy was incomplete, overheard in fragments, but it was enough. The Dark Lord began to hunt the families that fit its words. Among them was Lily Evans, Lily Potter now, married to James, mother of a child born as the 7th month died. My chest tightened when I realized, when I understood that my eagerness to please had placed her in his path. I had told myself that serving the Dark Lord would give me power, that it would make me strong. But now it threatened to take from me the one person whose memory still kept me from drowning completely. I went to him. I begged. I fell to my knees before the man I had sworn to follow, and I pleaded for Lily's life. Spare her, I asked, spare her only. He listened, amused, his eyes flickering with something like curiosity. He promised to consider it, though his smile made me doubt. I did not ask for James, I did not ask for the child. I asked only for her, because my heart was narrow even in its love. My loyalty was twisted by selfishness, and I could not yet see it. I thought if she lived, then all else could be endured. But Lily was not spared. That night in Godric's Hollow, the prophecy I had carried like a prize became the knife that cut me. James fell, Lily begged, and the Dark Lord raised his wand. He gave her the chance to step aside, as I had begged him to, but she refused. She died, and in her death she created the one protection he could not break. Her son lived, her sacrifice endured, and the Dark Lord was undone. I arrived too late. The house was in ruins, the air filled with the echo of a curse turned back on its master. I saw her body on the floor, her hair spread like fire across the wood, her eyes closed. I fell beside her and felt something tear loose in me, something I could never mend. I held her and wept, though the world has never seen those tears, and I begged the silence to return her. I would have given anything, even my own soul, to bring her back. But magic has edges it will not cross, and death is one of them. From that night, my life bent in a new direction. I returned to Dumbledore, the man I had once mistrusted, the man who had seen through me from the beginning. I confessed, I begged, I offered myself to him, not as a student, not as a spy for power, but as a broken man who had lost everything. Protect her son, I asked, protect the boy, because he is all that remains of her. Dumbledore's eyes were filled not with triumph but with sorrow, and he accepted my vow. It was the first step of my redemption. Though it did not feel like redemption, it felt like punishment, like chains forged from grief. The prophecy had been words spoken in trance, half heard and half understood, but its weight was heavier than any spell. It bound me to two masters, to the Dark Lord who sought to destroy, and to Dumbledore who sought to protect. It bound me to Harry Potter, the boy who lived because his mother died, the boy who would carry her eyes into every room he entered, the boy who would remind me at every turn of the life I had lost. I thought once that words could be controlled, that language was a tool in the hands of the clever, but words spoken in prophecy are different. They are not choices, they are chains. I carried those chains for the rest of my life, and though I fought, though I served, though I played my part, I knew always that the moment I leaned against that door in the Hog's Head was the moment I lost Lily forever. The ruin of Godric's Hollow still burned behind my eyes, the house torn open, the air thick with the residue of curses, and Lily's body on the floor as if sleep had failed her. I stumbled through that night like a man walking underwater. When I reached the castle, the stones seemed to lean toward me, listening without judgment. I climbed the stairs and stood before the door I had avoided for years, the office where his calm voice had once felt like a net that I could never slip. I knocked with a hand that did not feel like mine. When he bid me enter, I fell to my knees before the desk, the word please tearing free of me again and again, until silence swallowed it. I told him everything. The prophecy overheard, my haste to carry it to the Dark Lord, my selfish plea to spare only Lily, the promise given and the mercy denied. I said that she was dead, and that it was my fault, as surely as if the wand had been in my hand. I said that if there was any meaning left to my life, it would be to guard what remained of hers, the boy. He listened, hands folded, eyes that held the weight of centuries watching me without contempt. There was no triumph in his face, no scolding, only sorrow, and a quiet that made my shame ring louder. He asked me what I would give. I said anything. He asked me if I would leave the Dark Lord, if I would risk my life to right the wrong I had done, if I would carry lies like stones until my back broke and never set them down. I said yes. He asked if I would protect the boy, even if the boy looked at me with his father's scorn. I said yes. He asked if I would do these things not for glory, not for reward, but for love of the woman I had helped destroy. I said that love had made a ruin of me and that I would build my prison from it, if he asked. He nodded, and I felt chains close around me that were heavier than any dark vow. Yet for the first time since the house in Godric's Hollow, I could breathe. He spoke then of protection. The Dark Lord had fallen, not destroyed, only diminished. His followers would scatter and regather like crows after a shot. The child had lived because of the mother's sacrifice, but danger did not end with that miracle. The boy would be hidden with family, blood protection laid upon him, a charm that would last while he could call his aunt's house his home. I was to help ensure this protection held, not by spells alone, but by choices that would place me far from comfort. I was to return to the Serpent's Circle when it rose again, to kneel where I had knelt before, and hide the truth inside a mind guarded by occlumency until the habit of silence became my only voice. There is a special humiliation in swearing yourself to deception in front of a man who sees through most lies at a glance. Dumbledore knew I had been proud of my cleverness, proud of the masks I had learned to wear, but he asked for something more cruel than any mask. He asked me to become what others believed I was. A bitter man, a servant of darkness, a teacher who loved rules more than children. He asked me to play a villain so the boy could live. I said I would do it. I said I would do worse if he commanded it. I meant it in that hour, and I would mean it many times after, even when the part devoured me. He asked me if I could close my mind to the Dark Lord. I said I could learn, and I learned. Occlumency became the wall I built inside my skull. I packed grief into the stones and mortar of discipline. I learned to let the eye slide off truth, to let the hand hover an inch from confession and never fall. When his gaze would one day search me, he would find bitterness and ambition and old envy of James, all of it true, all of it ready to be read, and behind it the quiet room where Lily's name burned like a candle that would never go out. I lived in that room even when I stood in staff meetings or patrolled corridors. I slept there and woke there and returned there whenever the world demanded a face I could not bear to wear. Dumbledore asked one more thing. He asked me to keep my love a secret. I did not argue. Love had already made me into a penitent. To speak of it would have been profanation. He said there would be times I would hate him. He said there would be times when the plan would feel like a cruelty invented merely to test me. He said there would be a night when he would ask the worst of me. I listened and nodded, not understanding, but already resigned. He said that when the time came, I must remember that the aim was not glory, not even victory, but to keep the boy alive long enough to meet his fate with understanding rather than terror. I swallowed the word fate as if it were apt. I left his office with a task that had the shape of absolution, but not its comfort. The castle watched me as I descended. Portraits turned their heads. The gargoyles settled back into stone. The corridors sighed. Somewhere far away, a phoenix sang, a sound like a tear that had learned to be music. I pressed my fist against my ribs as if I could keep my heart from falling out. This would be my life now, the double path. Each step watched by eyes that wanted me to fall, and by eyes I wished would never see me as I would have to be seen. Years turned like pages. The Dark Lord did not return at once, but his memory hung in rooms where men with cold voices gathered to drink and tell stories. I kept my distance without leaving their shadow. I accepted a post at Hogwarts because Dumbledore asked it and because I could live nowhere else without drowning. Potions Master. The title fit my hands and my mind, and the dungeon welcomed me back with its strict air and its indifferent stone. I taught children to measure and stir, to respect cause and effect, to understand that a potion punishes impatience without malice. They feared me, most of them. That fear was a shield and a penance. It kept them from seeing what I could not allow them to see, and it punished me exactly as I believed I deserved. When the boy came at last, small, scarred, eyes green as the leaves by the river, it was as if the door to that inner room swung wide and the candle flared. I was not ready. No preparation can teach a man how to see his grief, looking back at him through another face, carrying the bone structure of the rival he had hated and the gaze of the friend he had loved. I felt anger rise because anger was easier than collapse. I covered him in detentions and sarcasm and took points from his house with meticulous cruelty. I told myself this was to protect him, that closeness would be noticed, that kindness would be suspicion. It was also because every time he looked at me with her eyes, I felt the ruin of Godric's Hollow all over again. Dumbledore did not waste breath rebuking me for my manner. He trusted me to do the work beneath the mask, and I did it. I brewed drafts that the boy never knew were for him. I shadowed corridors at night, because I had learned the places where danger likes to wait. I placed myself between him and harm, as a man steps between a candle and a draught, pretending he dislikes both flame and wind. When Quirrell stank of greed and something worse, I watched. When whispers curled around the Philosopher's Stone, I moved along the edges of those whispers until they led me where I needed to stand. More than once I saved a life and made it look like I had tripped someone on purpose. Let them believe I was petty. Petty men are not suspected of great loyalties. In the quiet of my dungeon, I made a Patronus, and it was a doe. I did not choose it. Patronuses are not chosen. They reveal. The silver shape walked calmly through the cold air, and I lowered my head because in that moment I knew that love was not a thing I could end by will. It was the law of my life, and the punishment of my life, and the compass of my life all at once. Dumbledore saw it once and asked for nothing more than a single word. I gave him that word, and it was the only prayer I have ever spoken without doubt, always. The sound was small in the stone room, but it shook the part of me that still expected mercy from the world. Thus the double life began in full. In staff room and at high table, the bristling figure, the cold voice, the sarcasm like a blade that had never been sheathed. In corridors behind closed doors, the go-between, the watcher, the spy. In audiences with the man I had once served, later when he returned, the bowed head and the guarded mind. In the late hours alone, the man at the table with a goblet untouched, the notebook open, the memory of a river where two children had decided to believe in something better than the town that raised them. Dumbledore and I met in that office many times. We spoke of the boy and of the shadows thickening around him. He asked me to teach the boy occlumency when the time came, and I did, badly at first, because the sight of James in that face made my temper leap, and because the boy's defiance reminded me too much of my own when I was young and stupid and hungry. I failed him more than once and hated myself twice for each failure, yet the work went on. Dumbledore did not release me. He tightened the plan like a knot, and I stood within it because there was nowhere else to stand. There would be a night when he would ask for the worst. He warned me again. He told me what had touched his hand and what would soon touch his life. He asked me to be the hand that ended his breath for the sake of a wand's allegiance and a boy's path and a war's end. I said no with a voice that broke like glass, and then I said yes because there was no other answer. I had crawled to him on my knees. I had asked him to make my life mean something after I had destroyed the only thing that mattered, and he had taken me at my word. A vow given in grief is still a vow. I would keep it, even if the keeping of it doomed me in every eye that ever looked upon me. Even if it buried what was left of my name beneath a mountain of hate, I would keep it because it was what love required, now that love could no longer save the one it had failed. So I rose from his office again, walked the stairs down, past the gargoyle that pretended to sleep, and returned to my rooms. I extinguished the lamps and stood in the dark. Outside, the lake breathed against its shores. Far away, a clock struck an hour. That did not matter. I pressed my palm over the place where the mark would burn again one day, and I whispered to a silence that had learned all my confessions. I will do it. I will protect the boy. I will keep the plan. I will become what they despise, so he can become what she died to save. And then I sat, and I waited for morning, and for the long road that would lead me to a tower, and a wand, and a green flash, and a lifetime's worth of judgment that I would carry without complaint, because it was the price I had earned. I felt my chest seize. Harry Potter, the boy who lived, the boy who carried my sin in his very existence. His hair was his father's, untidy and arrogant, even when he stood still. But his eyes were hers, green, bright, unflinching. Lily's eyes in James's face. The sight cut me in ways I had not prepared for. I had told myself I would be ready, that I would wear my mask of disdain, that I would see only the child I had sworn to protect. But when he lifted his head and looked at me with her gaze, all my walls cracked. My only refuge was cruelty. Sarcasm slid from my tongue like venom, because kindness would have exposed me, and exposure would have destroyed us both. The students laughed when I singled him out, when I cut points from his house, when I told him he was arrogant like his father. They thought it was malice, and in truth, part of it was. I hated the resemblance, hated how every glance reminded me of the one I had lost and the one who had taken her from me. Yet beneath the surface, the cruelty was also protection. If anyone suspected I felt warmth toward him, the game would be lost. The Dark Lord's eyes would eventually return, and when they did, I could not risk them finding affection where there should have been nothing but disdain. I watched him more closely than any student. Every mistake, every triumph, every late-night wander through the castle, I knew of them. I stalked corridors, not only because it pleased me to punish, but because danger walked those same stones. The Philosopher's Stone drew whispers, and Quirrell with his stammer hid more than nerves. When I saw the way the boy wandered near danger, my temper flared. It was easier to scold than to admit that fear gnawed at me. I made it my business to keep him safe, though he never knew. When his broom bucked under a curse during a Quidditch match, I muttered counter-curses until my jaw ached, and the crowd thought I had hexed him instead. Such is the fate of the man in shadows. Good deeds wear masks of cruelty. Dumbledore never rebuked me. He knew what I did. He trusted that I would protect the boy, though he never asked me to soften my manner. He understood that bitterness was my shield, and that to remove it would be to leave me bare. He asked only that I continue, that I never falter, that I keep my vow no matter how heavy it grew. And I did. Each year brought new threats. Each year tested the boundaries of my mask. I brewed potions to heal him when no one saw. I brewed antidotes to poisons before he had even encountered them. I watched his back in corridors where shadows gathered, yet I also lashed at him with words sharper than curses. He hated me, and that hatred became part of the disguise. The boy must never know, not until the very end, what bound me to him. Every time he looked at me with her eyes, I felt both ruin and renewal. Ruin because they reminded me of the day in Godric's Hollow, of the body on the floor, of the prophecy I had carried like a prize. Renewal because they reminded me of the river, of a girl who laughed when leaves curled in her hand, of a light I had once believed in. Her eyes in his face meant that she was not gone entirely, that something of her remained in the world. That was my torment, and that was my gift. Years passed in this way. He grew taller, braver, more reckless. He faced dangers most grown wizards would not endure. I saw James in his swagger, and I despised it. I saw Lily in his defiance, and I loved it. I lived in that tension, a man torn between two ghosts, one he hated and one he cherished, both walking the corridors in the body of a boy I could never claim. I called him Potter because I could not call him Harry. To speak his name would have been to acknowledge the bond, and I could not afford that. To everyone else I was his tormentor, his harshest critic, his enemy in the classroom. To myself I was his shadow, his unseen shield, the man who had vowed to keep him alive no matter the cost. The boy with her eyes was the weight I carried every day of my life after Godric's Hollow. He was the reminder of what I had lost and the reason I kept breathing. He was my punishment and my purpose, and though he would never know it until the very end, he was the only thing that kept me from collapsing into the abyss I had chosen. The boy's first year was a trial not only for him but for me, for every shadow in the castle seemed to stir with menace the moment he arrived. I told myself that Hogwarts had always been a fortress, a place guarded by spells older than most families could trace. Yet danger has a way of seeping into cracks no one notices until it is too late. When the whispers reached me that the Philosopher's Stone had been hidden within the castle, I knew that temptation would draw dark hands, for immortality is a lure few can resist. Dumbledore placed it under protection, each professor adding their own safeguard, and I knew at once that mine would be tested before the year was done. From the first feast, the boy's eyes searched the hall as if he belonged, yet did not, and I felt the pull of old grief rise like bile. I cut him with words because words were the only armor I had left, but beneath the sneers I watched his every move. Quirrell stuttered at the staff table, and I knew his tremble was not mere nerves. There was something coiled within him, something restless, and when the boy began to circle near him, curiosity turned to fear. Harry Potter was reckless in the way James Potter had been, stepping into danger with no thought for consequence, and each time he did, my vow tightened around me like chains. I remember the Quidditch match, when his broom lurched and bucked as if possessed. Students cheered in confusion, staff muttered spells, and I saw the truth at once. Quirrell's lips moved, his eyes fixed on the boy, and the broom shook as if trying to throw him to his death. I muttered counter-curses until sweat beaded my brow, focusing on the threads of dark magic lashing at the broom. The crowd thought I was the one hexing him, their whispers sharp, their eyes suspicious, but I did not falter. Better their contempt than his grave. The broom steadied, the match ended, the boy lived, and he never knew who had stood between him and the fall. The protections on the stone became the stage where the boy and his friends played their reckless game. I heard rumors of their wandering, their questions, their attempts to unravel mysteries far beyond their years. I snarled at them in corridors, I took points, I gave detentions, all in the hope of keeping them from the truth. But the truth draws those who seek it, and Gryffindors always seek. I knew where they would end if left unchecked, yet I could not reveal my hand too openly, for suspicion would have been fatal, and so I remained the villain, the bitter professor who hated the boy, while beneath that mask I tracked Quirrell and the threat he carried within him. When at last the boy descended through trapdoors and puzzles, when he faced trials meant for older and wiser wizards, I could only watch from the edges. He met Quirrell, and through Quirrell the Dark Lord himself, clinging like a parasite, weakened but not destroyed. The boy lived again, protected by his mother's sacrifice, shielded by love stronger than any spell. He faced Voldemort without knowing the depth of the foe, and survived, and when he woke in the infirmary, Dumbledore smiled at him with pride, while I turned away with bitterness that hid my relief. The boy's friends believed me cruel, and he believed it too. He thought I wanted him gone, thought I despised him simply because of James, and though that was partly true, the fuller truth lay deeper. I despised him because every breath he took reminded me of my failure, because every glance from his green eyes tore open the wound I carried, because love twisted into regret is a weight heavier than hate, and yet I protected him again and again, because my vow was stronger than my pride. The Sorcerer's Stone was removed. Nicholas Flamel accepted the end of his long life, and Hogwarts settled back into its rhythm of classes and chatter. But I knew that the shadows had only begun to stir. The Dark Lord was not gone, only waiting, and the boy was marked more deeply than he could imagine. I sharpened my mask of cruelty. I honed my role as tormentor, because the more he hated me, the safer he would be from guessing the truth. Love must hide itself in darkness if it wishes to survive the light of such a foe. And so his first year ended, with feasts and cheers and the Gryffindor table roaring with triumph, while I sat in the shadows, silent, my eyes on the boy who had lived twice now, where others would have fallen. He laughed with friends, unaware that every laugh echoed a memory of her voice. He carried her eyes through the hall as though she had never left, and I told myself, as I always did, that I would endure his hatred for as long as he lived, for as long as those eyes remained in the world. The boy's second year began with whispers of fear that spread quickly through stone corridors. The Chamber of Secrets, a story told as legend, A tale students whispered to frighten first years had awakened. The message scrawled in blood upon a wall chilled even the oldest ghosts, and students began to look over their shoulders as though the castle itself had turned against them. I remembered the stories as well as anyone, for Slytherin's legacy had been a weight upon me from the day I was sorted. Whispers of the monster in the chamber, whispers of the heir who would cleanse the school. It was the kind of tale my so-called friends in youth had admired, the kind of purity I had never been allowed to claim. And now it seemed the tale was more than myth. I watched the boy more closely than ever. Danger found him as if it were his second skin. He moved with his friends through corridors they had no business exploring, his curiosity forever outpacing his caution, his courage blinding him to consequence. I lashed at him harder that year, my tongue sharper, my punishment swifter, because I feared what the chamber might release. He took my contempt as proof of hatred, and perhaps it was, but beneath it all lay vigilance. If the monster walked, I would be near enough to intervene. He never saw it, never could, and that was as Dumbledore intended. Students were petrified, their bodies stiff, their eyes wide with terror frozen in them. The castle grew quiet, laughter dying away, feasts subdued, rumors spread like smoke. Some looked to Slytherin with suspicion, and I felt again the coldness of belonging to a house marked by history's darkest shadows. I knew the boy heard the whispers that he was the heir of Slytherin. I saw him carry that suspicion with clenched fists and puzzled eyes. I never spoke in his defense, for my role did not allow it, but I watched. Always I watched. In staff meetings I heard the concern in voices that usually carried only routine. Dumbledore remained calm, though I saw the shadow of worry in his gaze. He trusted the boy far more than he should, and I wondered if he already sensed the truth that would one day be revealed. I argued for stricter measures for keeping students contained, for discipline as shield. My words were dismissed as bitterness, but discipline is a kind of care, and I would have locked the castle down brick by brick if it meant the boy would live through the year. I prowled the halls at night, cloak trailing like a shadow, my wand ready for any flicker of movement. The chamber itself was hidden from me, hidden from all but those who carried Slytherin's tongue, Parcel tongue. The boy had it, though he did not understand what it meant. When I heard the whispers that he could speak to snakes, I knew the danger of what that would bring. Students would fear him. The Dark Lord had carried that same gift. I looked into his eyes and wondered how many marks of destiny he carried, how many ties bound him to the man I had once served. The dueling club was another farce, Lockhart preening like a peacock, his wand flourishes empty. Yet in that chaos, the boy revealed himself. A snake appeared, and he spoke to it in the tongue of serpents. The hall recoiled, students whispering that he must be the heir. I saw the fear in their eyes, and in his confusion, he did not yet understand the depth of what lived inside him. I did. It confirmed what Dumbledore had long suspected, what I had long feared. The boy was bound to the Dark Lord in ways we could not yet name, and still my vow held. Protect him, no matter the whispers, no matter the danger, no matter what truth one day emerge. When Ginny Weasley was taken into the chamber, the castle trembled with dread. The staff gathered, the decision near to send the children home, to admit that Hogwarts was no longer safe, but Dumbledore held the line, his faith in the boy unshaken. I clenched my fists beneath the table, silent, watching as events spiraled beyond my reach. Harry Potter went where no one else could go, into the chamber itself, into the lair of the monster. He returned bloodied but alive, the basilisk slain, the girl saved, the diary destroyed. He carried victory with the same ease he carried trouble, and once more the hall roared with Gryffindor triumph while I sat in shadow. No one saw the deeper meaning. The diary was not just a memory, not just a cursed object. It was a fragment of soul, though I did not yet know the full truth. Already the Dark Lord's shadow had slithered back into the world through that tattered book, and already the boy had faced him and survived. I watched him across the hall at the feast, laughter in his throat, friends by his side, and I felt both rage and sorrow. Rage because he lived with a freedom I had never known. Sorrow because I knew his path was chained to darkness, whether he understood it or not. The chamber closed again, but the cracks it had opened did not heal. I saw it in the eyes of students who remembered, who had been petrified. I saw it in the boy's face when he thought no one was watching, the weight of whispers pressing down. And I saw it in Dumbledore's quiet, the way he looked at Harry, not as a child, but as a piece of destiny moving across the board of war. My vow remained, and I bore it in silence. The boy with her eyes had faced death again and returned, and I knew it would not be the last time. The castle settled, but the shadows did not. They never would. By the boy's third year, the castle no longer felt like a fortress, but a battleground preparing itself. The Dementors stationed at the gates were meant to guard, yet I knew what they truly brought. Despair in waves that seeped through stone and chilled every breath. I despised their presence, for I had studied them long enough to know what they consumed. Children should not have to walk to lessons with shadows clawing at their joy. I argued. Dumbledore argued harder, but the ministry had chosen fear over wisdom, as they so often did. Harry Potter walked under their influence like a wound reopened. His face paled each time the creatures drew near, and when he fainted on the train, I understood that something in him called to them louder than most. He had already known death, had already carried screams in his memory, and Dementors feed best on those who have seen what others can only imagine. I scowled at him when he stumbled, but my hands shook behind my sleeves. If they took him, if they pressed their kiss to his lips, Lily's sacrifice would end in silence. The irony of Remus Lupin's return was not lost on me. The boy now sat at the feet of the marauder who had once been silent while I was tormented, the man who had carried his curse into the castle with careless secrecy. Yet even I could not deny that Lupin was a capable teacher, more capable than most who had ever stood in that post. He taught Harry how to defend against the very shadows that had nearly broken him. My bitterness did not vanish, but I watched. Always I watched. I brewed wolfsbane for Lupin, not because I pitied him, but because Dumbledore required it, and because even my hatred could not outweigh the vow I had made. Still, every vial I brewed was filled with old rage, and when the boy smiled at Lupin, I turned away, the dungeon air thick with smoke to hide the tightening in my chest. That year ended in chaos, as every year seemed to when Harry Potter walked the halls. Black had returned, Sirius, the one who had mocked me most cruelly, the one who had led me once toward death at the hands of a werewolf for his own amusement. I pursued him with all the fury I had carried since my youth, convinced that he had betrayed Lily, convinced that his death would be justice at last. I cornered him, wand raised, the memory of humiliation burning in my throat, but the truth unraveled in front of me. Pettigrew was the traitor, the coward hiding in plain sight. Black was guilty of much, but not of the crime I had assigned him. That revelation twisted my hatred, but did not erase it. Hatred that has grown for decades does not vanish when truth shifts. By the boy's fourth year, the shadows no longer whispered, they shouted. The Triwizard Tournament was announced, a spectacle meant for unity, but built upon danger. I argued against his inclusion when the boy's name emerged from the goblet, yet he stood in the arena all the same, a child facing tasks meant for grown wizards. I brewed potions for him in secret, prepared antidotes he never knew he might need. I glared at him in class, told him he was arrogant, but in silence I counted the ways he might die and swore none of them would succeed. The night of the graveyard came like a storm I had dreaded but still could not prevent. Voldemort returned. The mark on my arm burned as if fire had been poured beneath my skin, and I knew at once that the years of fragile peace were over. He stood again, whole and terrible, his eyes the same red as when I had last knelt before him. And once more I knelt, my face calm, my mind locked tight. occlumency shielding every corner where truth might hide. He asked me where my loyalties lay, and I gave him bitterness, disdain for the boy, envy of James's ghost, every piece of myself that was true, but not the whole truth. He accepted it, and I rose again as servant, though I remained Dumbledore's man. The boy had faced him and returned, scar burning, eyes haunted. He had dueled the Dark Lord and lived again, and the wizarding world trembled with denial. The ministry called him a liar, called Dumbledore a fearmonger, called me a bitter man who spoke only from spite. Yet I knew the truth. War had returned, and I would walk again the path of the double life, each step a risk, each word a blade. I would carry messages to Voldemort with calm precision. I would bring secrets back to Dumbledore in whispers. I would smile at those I loathed and sneer at those I loved, because that was the cost of my vow. The Dark Lord returned, and the world shifted. Children laughed less, parents feared more, and the boy carried yet another weight he did not deserve. He was still a child, yet prophecy clung to him like chains. I sharpened my mask. I honed my cruelty, because the game had turned deadly, and any misstep would reveal me. He hated me more with each year, and I let him, because his hatred was the shield behind which I worked. The Dark Lord returned, and I returned to my role, a role I would play until it consumed me. When the Dark Lord rose again, his circle tightened, and suspicion became the air we breathed. Every gathering was a test, every word weighed, every silence dangerous. I endured his gaze with the calmness Occlumagula allowed, showing him bitterness, envy, ambition, all the truths that was safe to reveal. Yet beneath those truths I carried the vow I had made to Dumbledore, the vow that bound me more tightly than any dark mark. It was Narcissa who came to me in desperation, her fear sharp as broken glass. Draco had been given a task, one far beyond the reach of a boy his age. The Dark Lord had commanded him to kill Dumbledore, not only as punishment for Lucius's failures, but as a test of loyalty, a test designed for Draco to fail. Failure would mean death, success would mean a soul shattered. Narcissa saw both ends of the rope and sought me in the dark to cut it. Bellatrix came with her, her suspicion fierce, her hatred for me like fire. She pressed me with questions, demanded proof of my loyalty, her eyes seeking cracks. Narcissa wept and begged, and I listened. Then the vow was spoken. The words shaped magic that bound tighter than iron. I swore to protect Draco, to shield him from harm, to carry the task if he could not. Each promise sealed itself in fire around my arm, a chain that squeezed until I thought my bones would break. Bellatrix watched with satisfaction, believing she had cornered me, believing she had forced me to declare myself once and for all. She did not know that the vow aligned with a promise I had already made in Dumbledore's office when he told me what was to come. For Dumbledore was dying. The curse that had clung to his hand when he put on the ring, the Horcrux we later destroyed, was creeping through him like poison that no potion could halt. He had time, but not much. He had looked at me with those calm blue eyes and said that when the end came, it must be by my hand. He said it would save Draco, it would preserve the Elder Wand's allegiance, it would spare the boy from becoming a killer. I had said no. I had argued. I had begged him to ask another, but he had been firm. He said I was the only one he trusted to do it. He said it was mercy, not cruelty, though it felt like damnation. So, when I made the unbreakable vow with Narcissa, when I swore before Bellatrix's piercing gaze, I was binding myself not to Voldemort's will, but to Dumbledore's plan. I would be Draco's shield. I would be Dumbledore's executioner. I would be the villain in the eyes of all, because love had left me no other choice. That year was a knife's edge. Draco worked in secret, pale and tense, his eyes dark with fear. He built machines, plotted entrances, sought ways into the tower. I watched him closely, helped where I could without revealing too much, protected him from suspicion even as he resented me for it. He thought I was stealing his task, undermining his mission, but I was only keeping him alive. Each night, I returned to my rooms with the weight heavier, the vow burning, the knowledge of what waited on the tower, pressing like a storm on the horizon. Harry watched me too, his hatred sharper than ever. He saw me as Draco's ally, as Dumbledore's betrayer in waiting. And in this, he was closer to the truth than he could know, though the truth was more twisted. I snarled at him, punished him, let him see contempt in every glance. Better he despise me than suspect my hand would one day be forced against the only man who had trusted me fully. The unbreakable vow was more than words. It was a chain that bit deeper with every passing day. I felt it in my dreams, in the way my wand hand sometimes trembled, in the way my breath caught when I saw Dumbledore across the hall. I avoided his gaze when others were near, but in private he looked at me with calm that infuriated me. He had accepted his death, I had not. The night drew nearer. Each step Draco took, bringing him closer to collapse. I saw the boy's hands shake, saw the sweat on his brow, saw the fear he tried to hide. I pitied him even as I envied him, for his burden was heavy, but his soul was not yet scarred. Mine had been scarred long before. I stood between two vows, one sworn in grief, one sealed in fire. Both led to the same tower, the same wand, the same flash of green. I told myself again and again that it was for her, that every choice I had made since the river had led me here, that love demanded sacrifice even when it tasted like ash. The unbreakable vow held me, and I held it in return, knowing that when the moment came I would not falter, even if it meant the world would curse my name forever. The night came with a chill that reached through stone and skin. The castle seemed to know what was about to unfold, its staircases groaning, its torches dimming, its silence deeper than usual. Draco had made his attempt, desperate, trembling, his wand pointed at the man he had been ordered to kill. Dumbledore stood weakened, the curse spreading through him like black veins, yet his voice was calm, steady, coaxing Draco with gentleness even as the boy's arm shook. I arrived as the plan demanded, as the vow demanded, cloak snapping behind me in the wind that cut across the tower. Draco lowered his wand by inches, his courage faltering. Death Eaters appeared around us, called by the dark mark that had lit the sky, their voices urging Draco to strike, to prove himself, to seal his fate. He could not. He was still a boy, still clinging to the edges of innocence, and I felt pity even in that moment, pity mixed with envy. I had lost such innocence long ago. The weight of the vow burned on my arm, the weight of Dumbledore's gaze pressed on my soul. Dumbledore spoke to me then, his voice soft, almost tired, and in that look he reminded me of what I had promised. There was no plea in his eyes, no fear, only trust. Terrible trust that I did not deserve. I wanted to scream, to defy both vows, to find some third path that would spare him, spare Draco, spare me. But magic binds tighter than wishes, and love binds tighter than magic. I had sworn, and my life had become the sum of oaths I could not escape. So I raised my wand. The boy with her eyes was far from this tower, sleeping perhaps, dreaming without knowing that his world was about to change. I thought of Lily, of her laughter by the river, of her hair burning in sunlight, of the word I had spoken that lost her forever. I thought of the promise I had made in grief, the promise I had renewed again and again, each time her son's gaze met mine. I thought of Dumbledore's quiet acceptance, his hand blackened by the curse, his strength failing. I thought of Draco, shaking, his soul about to break. I thought of myself, a man made of failures and vows. Avada Kedavra. The words tore free like poison, and the green light leapt from my wand. Dumbledore fell, his body drifting from the tower with a grace that mocked the violence of the spell, his robes billowing, his figure shrinking until the night swallowed him. Gasps rang from the Death Eaters, shouts of triumph, disbelief, awe. Draco lowered his wand entirely, his face pale, his eyes wide. I stood frozen, the echo of the curse still ringing in my bones. The Death Eaters hailed me then, their cries filling the tower, their hands reaching, their voices declaring loyalty. Bellatrix's laughter cut the air, sharp and wild. They believed me theirs at last, believed I had cast away every doubt. I let them believe it. My face showed nothing but coldness, my voice nothing but command. I herded them away, shielded Draco with my presence, led them out as the castle itself seemed to wail. The boy would hear of it soon. Harry Potter would hear that I had killed his protector, his mentor, the only man who had ever believed in him fully. He would hate me more than ever, and that hatred would become a fire hotter than any spell. It was the fire Dumbledore had counted on, the fire that would carry him forward when despair might have broken him. I would become the villain, so he could become the hero. That was the price. That was my role. When the night ended, I returned to my rooms, my hands trembling, my breath ragged. I poured a potion and let it sit untouched, watching the surface ripple with candlelight. I told myself I had done it for her, for Lily, for the boy. I told myself again and again, until the words became a rhythm, a chant, a lullaby for a man who had just murdered his only ally. I whispered always into the silence, and the silence gave no answer. The Tower Knight became the mark that would never fade. To the world I was Dumbledore's killer. To the Death Eaters I was their champion. To the boy I was the embodiment of betrayal. To myself I was nothing but a servant of two vows, a man who had emptied his soul into a curse so that others might live. The mark on my arm no longer burned that night. It pulsed with satisfaction. The vow I had made with Narcissa lay quiet, fulfilled, and yet the vow I had made before Dumbledore's desk still bound me, still demanded that I protect the boy, still chained me to a path that would lead only to more hatred, more sacrifice, more nights staring into the dark. On the tower, I had ended a life, but the war was far from over, and I knew that the next part of my role would demand even more. They gave me the title of Headmaster, but the castle did not welcome me with warmth. Its stones remembered, its portraits whispered, its staircases creaked in ways that sounded like protest. I took the chair in the office where Dumbledore had once sat, and Fawkes had already flown, leaving behind only silence and the smell of ashes. I sat behind the desk and felt the weight of the room pressing on me, accusing me, reminding me of the green light that had ended its master. To the world I was a usurper, to the Death Eaters I was their man, to the students I was the villain. But beneath the mask I carried the same vow as always: protect them, protect the boy, no matter what name they cursed me with. The Carrows were placed at my side, brother and sister, cruel and unrestrained. They turned the classrooms into chambers of punishment, their lessons into weapons. I watched them closely, intervened when I could without revealing my hand. But too often I had to let their cruelty stand or risk my position. And so the students believed I was complicit. They whispered that I was worse than the Carrows, that my silence proved my malice. In truth, every silence was chosen, calculated, endured, so that I could remain in place long enough to act when the moment came. I walked the halls at night and saw rebellion growing in the eyes of children. Neville Longbottom, once timid, now carried courage that glowed like a torch. Others followed him, forming resistance in shadows, striking when they could, hiding in the room of requirement, where even the Carrows could not reach. I allowed it more often than I should have. I turned my head when whispers spread. I looked the other way when footsteps echoed where they should not. The mask had to remain intact, but my vow demanded more than cruelty. The staff saw through pieces of it. Minerva looked at me with eyes that burned, her contempt open, her suspicion unmasked. She believed I had betrayed us all, and I let her, better her hatred than her knowledge. Flitwick, Sprout, even Hagrid, they treated me as an enemy, and I did nothing to dissuade them. I could not. The Dark Lord's gaze stretched long, and any hint of divided loyalty would have ended me before I could finish what I had promised. The boy was gone from the castle. but his shadow lingered. Every plan I made, every move I calculated, was with him in mind. He was out there gathering the tools that would end this war, though I did not know all the details. Dumbledore had left me fragments, enough to follow, not enough to question. I trusted that the boy would return, because trust was all I had left. Until then, I ruled as tyrant, walked as villain, spoke as traitor, because that was the mask Dumbledore required. There were nights when I sat in the office and looked at the empty perch where Fawkes had once sung. I remembered the sound of his voice when Dumbledore had asked me for mercy in the tower, remembered the trust in his eyes. I told myself again and again that I had not killed him in betrayal, but in love, in obedience, in necessity. The words tasted like ash, but I repeated them until sleep came. Always, I whispered, always, and the walls of the office echoed nothing back. When the boy returned at last, it was as though the castle itself exhaled. War flooded its halls, spells cracked against stone. Children fought as if they had been born for this hour. I knew my part was ending, that my mask could not last much longer. The Dark Lord grew restless, suspicious, his eyes sharper each time they fell upon me. He spoke of the Elder Wand, of the wand that had failed him, of its allegiance. His gaze lingered on me too long, his words dipped in doubt. I knew what was coming. The vow I had made in fire would soon demand its final price. But even as the end drew near, I held the mask until the last moment. I played the role of headmaster, cold, severe, hated, because that hatred kept others alive. They never knew the nights I walked past doors and stilled the Carrow's wands, never knew the detentions I softened into warnings, never knew the lines I crossed to shield them without revealing it. They saw only the villain, and perhaps that was justice. Perhaps that was all I deserved. The headmaster's mask was the heaviest I had ever worn, heavier even than the mark on my arm, heavier than the word I had spoken by the lake. It pressed on me until I could no longer tell where the mask ended and where I began. Yet I wore it, because it was the only way to keep the vow alive long enough for the boy to finish what Lily's death had begun. The night of the battle began with a silence that was heavier than any spell. The castle itself seemed to shiver, portraits whispering in their frames, staircases groaning as though they knew the weight of footsteps they would soon carry. Word spread quickly. The boy had returned, and with him came the war. Students armed themselves with wands that shook in their hands, but not in their resolve. Teachers prepared defenses, spells of stone and fire, wards layered upon wards, yet we all knew the truth. Hogwarts would bleed before the night ended. I walked the halls as headmaster for the last time. My cloak trailed behind me, my wand heavy at my side. To most, I was the enemy, the murderer of Dumbledore, the tyrant who had ruled with Carrows at his side. Eyes glared at me with open hate, voices muttered curses under their breath. I accepted it. Hatred was my shield, suspicion my cover. If they had seen the truth, it would have undone everything. So I walked in silence, each step measured, each thought locked away, knowing that the moment of unmasking was near. The Dark Lord summoned me often in those final days, his voice cold in my mind, the mark on my arm burning with a heat that seared to the bone. His suspicion grew sharper. He spoke of the Elder Wand, of how it had failed him, of how its allegiance must not yet be his. His eyes lingered on me with doubt, and though I bowed, though I lowered my gaze, I knew what it meant. He believed I had stolen the wand's loyalty when I ended Dumbledore's life. He believed that killing me would bend the wand fully to him. I saw my death in his eyes long before his snake's fangs reached me. But before that moment, the battle came. The castle erupted in fire and fury. Spells cracked like thunder, stone shattered under curses, screams echoed against walls that had once rung with laughter. Students fought with bravery that made my chest ache. Children who had been mocked for clumsiness or timidity now stood tall, casting shields, hexes, anything to push back the tide. The Carrows fled into chaos, their cruelty unmasked as cowardice. The staff fought with fierce precision, Minerva at the front, her wand cutting arcs of flame, her eyes ablaze with fury. I saw her once across the hall, her gaze meeting mine, and in that instant I knew she would kill me if she could. I did not blame her. The boy moved through the castle like fate itself. I glimpsed him only once, his face set, his eyes burning with purpose. He carried with him not only his wand, but the weight of prophecy, though he did not yet know its full truth. Dumbledore's plan had led him here. My vow had kept him alive for this moment, and now all I could do was ensure the path stayed clear long enough for him to walk it. I fought when I had to, deflected curses, disarmed foes, played the role of servant even in battle. To the Death Eaters, I was their commander, their ally. To the Defenders, I was their enemy. In truth, I was neither. I was only a man counting breaths until the Dark Lord called me, knowing that when he did, the end would come. The castle shook as giants struck its walls, as spiders poured from the forest, as screams carried on the wind. The air was thick with smoke and magic, the scent of burning wood and stone sharp in my throat. I moved through it like a shadow, always watching, always calculating, always protecting in ways no one would see. I turned curses aside that would have ended students, redirected spells that would have felled teachers, and let the credit fall to others. Let them believe I was only protecting myself. It was safer that way. When the tide of the battle paused, when Voldemort called for a truce, the silence was worse than the noise. Bodies lay still in the halls, blood staining the stones. Cries of grief echoed as names were spoken, friends lost, children fallen. I stood apart, silent, my mask intact, though inside my chest felt hollow. Each death was another weight on my vow, another reminder of the cost of silence. I told myself the end was near, that the boy would finish what he had been born to finish. But before he could, the Dark Lord would turn to me. I felt it in the way the mark pulsed, in the way his voice slithered through my mind. And so, in the quiet between battles, I prepared for my last part. I had played the villain for years, endured hatred, worn masks that cut into my skin. Now I would play the final role, the traitor betrayed, the servant discarded. I would die as I had lived, misunderstood. Yet even in that thought there was clarity. My death would not be in vain if the boy lived. My life had long since ceased to be my own. It belonged to the memory of a girl by the river, to the boy with her eyes, to the vow I had spoken on my knees before a desk of polished wood. The final battle raged outside, but within me all was quiet. I knew what was coming, and I walked toward it without hesitation. The Dark Lord summoned me when the night was heavy with smoke and screams. I followed without question, for there was no path left but forward. The battle roared outside, spells flashing against the sky, giants thundering against the walls, but the air inside the shack was cold and still, a pocket of silence carved out by fear. He stood there with the Elder Wand in his hand, the wand that had once been Dumbledore's, the wand that had not obeyed him as he expected. His eyes, red and merciless, fixed on me. He spoke of loyalty, of service, of the years I had given. He praised me with words as smooth as poison, words that carried no warmth. He said that I had been his most faithful servant, that my reward would be great, that I had proven myself beyond doubt. I knew then what was coming, because I had heard that tone before. It was the tone of a man who spoke kindness while planning death. He believed the wand's allegiance belonged to me because I had ended Dumbledore. He believed that my life stood between him and the power he craved. He did not understand the truth, that the wand's loyalty had never been mine, that it had passed to the boy who disarmed Draco. But in his ignorance, he sealed my fate. He called Nagini. The great snake slid across the floor, her eyes gleaming, her coils rippling with hunger. She was his instrument now, his executioner. I felt fear, but it was not for myself. It was for the vow unfinished, for the boy who still needed to know the truth. The fangs struck, and fire burned through my neck, hot and sharp, and I fell to the floor as warmth poured from me in streams I could not stop. My hands pressed against the wounds, my breath rattled, my vision blurred. But even in that moment, I thought of Lily, her laughter at the river, her eyes when she turned away from me, her arms around her son, the night she died. The boy appeared then, Harry Potter, the child of prophecy, the child who carried my ruin in his scar and my hope in his eyes. He looked at me with suspicion, with hatred, with the same anger he had always felt. I reached for him, for there was no time left, no words left, only memories. "Take them," I whispered, "take them." My tears, my life, my truth poured out in silver strands, shining even as my blood darkened the floor. He collected them, confused, reluctant, but he obeyed. He did not yet know what they meant, but he would. He would see. He would know. I wanted to tell him more. I wanted to tell him that every cruel word had been armor, that every glare had been a shield, that every moment of disdain had hidden the vow that kept him alive. I wanted to tell him that when I looked into his eyes, I saw her, not him, and that this had been both my torment and my reason. But breath failed me, and speech turned to silence. Only one word remained, the word that had defined me, the word that had bound me from the moment I fell at Dumbledore's desk, always. It was not spoken aloud, but it echoed in my chest as the world dimmed. The boy knelt near me, his face a blur, his eyes bright, even through the haze of my fading sight. I thought of Lily one last time, of how her smile had been the only light in Spinner's End, of how her voice had been the only music in a childhood of silence, of how her love for her son had been the force that changed the fate of the world. I thought of the vow I had kept, broken as I was, bitter as I was, hated as I was. I thought of the truth he would see when he poured those memories into the pensieve, when he walked my life step by step, when he finally understood that the man he had despised had lived and died for him. The snake's venom burned deeper, my lungs faltered, the floor grew colder, my eyes fixed on his, the last sight I would ever carry, green as the leaves by the river, green as lilies, green as the promise I had never fulfilled. My chest rose once more, fell once more, and then stilled. The shrieking shack held my body, but my truth lay in the boy's hands. I had been a spy, a servant, a villain, a guardian. I had been broken by pride and remade by love. I had been Severus Snape, and I had kept my vow. The boy carried my memories as if they were nothing more than strands of light, unaware that they contained the whole of me. In the quiet of the headmaster's office, he poured them into the pensieve, and the surface rippled. Then he leaned forward, and the truth drew him under. My life unfolded before his eyes, piece by piece, the way it had unfolded for me, though I had lived it in shadows, and he saw it now in light. He saw a boy in Spinner's End, thin and sullen, hiding from his father's rage and his mother's sorrow. He saw the spark of magic that had made me different, that had marked me as other, the refuge I found in books and potions. He saw me by the river, my first meeting with Lily, the laughter that warmed me for the first time, the bond we forged in secret, the joy of telling her she was not alone. He saw my sorting, the whisper of ambition that led me into Slytherin, the pride and the regret that followed. He saw the marauders tormenting me, James and Sirius with their cruel laughter, Remus silent, Pettigrew giddy with malice. He saw me humiliated in front of the school, dangling in the air while Lily defended me, and he saw the word that broke everything, the word that spilled from my mouth like venom and cut her away from me forever. He saw my grief when she turned, my anger when I fell deeper into Slytherin's circle, my hunger for power that drove me into the arms of the Dark Lord. He saw the Hog's Head, the prophecy whispered through Sybil's trance, my eagerness to carry it to my master, my blindness to what it meant. He saw me on my knees before the Dark Lord, begging for Lily's life, offering nothing for James, nothing for the child, because my love was selfish even in its desperation. He saw Godric's hollow, her body on the floor, my tears soaking into her hair, my sobs tearing through the silence. He saw me collapse before Dumbledore, confessing, begging, offering my life in exchange for the boys. He saw my vow, my promise to keep Harry alive. He saw me teaching, cruel in manner but vigilant in duty, protecting him again and again, though he thought me his enemy. He saw my Patronus, the silver doe, stepping gently into the air, the mirror of lilies, the confession that I had loved her still. He heard Dumbledore ask me whether, after all this time, I still loved her, and he heard my answer, the only word I ever spoke with perfect clarity: always. He saw the tower, Dumbledore's blackened hand, the plea in his eyes, the order given. He saw me cast the curse that ended his life, not as betrayal but as mercy, not as ambition but as obedience to a vow. He saw the hatred of students, the contempt of teachers, the mask I wore as headmaster, my silence as I endured their scorn. He saw me save them in secret, shield them without their knowledge, protect them even when they believed I was their jailer. He saw me face the Dark Lord, my death at Nagini's fangs, my memories poured into his hands, my final gift. And when the boy emerged from the pensieve, he knew that I had been cruel, because I could not afford to be kind, that I had been hated, because hatred was the mask that kept me alive. He knew that every step I had taken since Lily's death had been for her son, even if I never admitted it. He knew that I had loved her, that I had never stopped, that every spell I cast and every lie I told and every mask I wore had been bound to that love. The truth was not clean. It was not noble in the way stories prefer. I had been jealous, bitter, selfish. I had made mistakes that could never be undone. I had hurt, I had hated, I had failed, but I had also loved, and in that love, I had endured chains that would have broken others. I had carried the vow to the end. Through humiliation, through suspicion, through hatred, I had given my life for the boy, not because I loved him, but because I loved the woman who had died for him. And in the end, that was enough. The boy understood. He carried the truth with him into the forest, into the final confrontation. He carried my memories as armor, as clarity, as proof that sacrifice is not always clean but still carries weight. And though he never said it aloud, though he never looked back with forgiveness, I knew he would remember. He would remember the man who had been his enemy and his protector, his tormentor and his shield. He would remember that Severus Snape had lived and died for Lily Evans and for the boy with her eyes. That was my legacy. Not glory, not love, returned. Not even gratitude. My legacy was truth revealed too late, love confessed in silence, a vow kept until the end. And though I died misunderstood, I died having done what I swore, always.